Well, hello there, and today we are going to rank all the European countries on GeoGuessr, and this tier list will be based on how difficult the countries are to get, as well as getting close regional guesses. A big shout out to Zigzag for coming up with this idea. Check out his channel, check out his tier list. Feel free to give this a go yourself in your own time. If you enjoy this video and want to see more of this, smash the like button and subscribe. And yeah, let's jump straight into the video. Rightio, let's start off with fish and chips. And if you don't know what fish and chips is, it is a very British thing to say, obviously, but I will never get this wrong. I should never get these countries or territories wrong at all. And the very first country or territory is Gibraltar. When I calculated it, it was ranked 7. Mostly because of its distinctive antenna. It's a very distinctive kind of area. You got yellow plates, which is quite unusual for mainland Europe. So, although it's not on this tier list, it will be under fish and chips. Also, the other 7 I've put is Monaco, and I don't think it's on the tier list either, but it's a similar situation with its plates being very different. It's a very distinctive area towards southeast France. Monaco's going to be pretty high, very small country, and I've never got it wrong really, so that will also be in fish and chips. Based on this tier list, the actual easiest country in Europe for me is Malta. And why? Well, Malta is the only country besides the British Isles that drive left in Europe, and it tends to have like a Italian kind of Mediterranean feel to it. So driving side left and the Mediterranean feel makes it quite easy to get Malta. Signs of English everywhere, quite a distinctive landscape. Belarus is the next one, and the reason Belarus is up there is because of the lack of footage it has. It's all pretty much around the capital, and I'll get it pretty much every time. The fact of it being a bigger country has kind of had an influence on its score, probably a bit too much, but I haven't seen any real footage, but if you want to share that, comment down below. But Belarus has to be high up in the list as well. The next kind of region or territory or country, whatever you want to call it, the Faroe Islands. But this is only down to the Google card, in my opinion. If the Google card was excluded from this video, then it'll be in It'll Do Jeff, because you can get confused with it by Iceland. However, it has 3 racks on the Google card. Iceland does not have the Google card, although it looks quite similar to Iceland. That kind of like has a massive influence on its score, and the Faroes has a score of 10, which puts it under fish and chips. The next island I have done is the Isle of Man, which is not on this tier list, but there are quite a lot of distinctive factors. You've got the red strip on the license plate, which is a very handy way of confirming it. It's a very small island as well, so you're guaranteed to get good points if you get it. Region guessing for me is quite simple. Done a bit of exploring on the Isle of Man, and I'm not bad with the vibes either. The next one on this tier list is actually San Marino. And the reason why I put this in fish and chips is because it is very different to Italy's license plates. So Italy has short plates with blue on both sides. San Marino doesn't even have the EU strip. San Marino also only has Generation 2. It used to have Generation 3 in the past, but it was apparently deleted. Maybe it will come back, who knows? There were quite a few differences in San Marino that really stand out, and I'm good with the general vibe. And of course, it's a very small country, which is going to have an impact on its score. So San Marino will be in fish and chips. The next country I have put down is Andorra. In terms of it being a small country, it having distinctive license plates, which are not EU strip, and they have like a yellow mark in the middle, which is quite handy. Very distinctive architecture. There's quite a lot of clues to confirm Andorra, and obviously you may have some similarities along that the around the Pyrenees, so maybe it's not always 100% given, but it's that straightforward and easy. On most rounds it has to be under fish and chips. Okay, the next country I've put in fish and chips is Germany, or in other words, Germany. So country identification of Germany is very easy, mostly because of its washed out coverage. It's towards the lower end of fish and chips, mostly because my region guessing in Germany can be better. I've noticed a few patterns, but I haven't really studied the street signs and stuff like that. But yeah, it has to be under fish and chips, and it's probably the largest country on the fish and chips list. Next up is Iceland. So we had the Faroes before, and we now have Iceland. Similar story to before, but you don't have the Google card racks. But if we exclude that fact, it's very distinctive, and it's a bit hard on the Faroes, I feel, because it's a well, it's much bigger, and also regional difficulty can be harder. So I had to put Iceland more towards the lower end, but very distinctive landscape. I've been there a couple of times myself, and yeah, the yellow bars is very distinctive too. It's with the volcanic soil. It's a very distinctive country. And finally, the last fish and chips is in, where is it? Switzerland. So the reason why Switzerland is probably in fish and chips and not in Italy is because of its low cam. Switzerland is the only country in Europe to have low camera. There's a little bit in Italy, but it's like a very small region that you pretty much never get in the game. But the low camera makes it very handy, but you have also a lot of other clues like pedestrian signs. You've got language variations, so you can actually narrow down the region you're in Switzerland based on the language. You've also got mountain chains, so you can determine whether you're in the flatter parts, the more mountainous parts. So it's quite a handy country on GeoGuessr to get, and it has to be in fish and chips. Right here, so now we are moving on to Italy. The first country I've put in with a score of 14 is Austria. Austria is smaller than people think it is. It's quite handy. There are quite a few clues like the bollards. Also, Vienna is very distinctive. And to be honest, it's more the rural difficulty is not as bad in Austria. Then it gets more flat towards the east, so it's quite a handy country to get. The next country I've put is Netherlands, and to be honest, where the hell is the Netherlands? There it is. This one I was very tempted to put in fish and chips actually, but there's one problem with the Netherlands that I struggle with, and that is regional difficulty. It's the north part of the Netherlands, or maybe towards the Germany border, that I'm not too great with. With its double yellow plates, with it being very flat, very unique environment, architecture too, and the way the roads are paved, the Netherlands has to be in Italy, and it has to be right on the border of fish and chips. The next one is Belgium, and this is ranked 15, so slightly harder than the Netherlands, I feel. I think you can muddle it up with Luxembourg more often than you would do with the Netherlands, and probably the same with muddling it up with France, especially on the borders, but with the license plates with the reddish text. There's also a few other factors that make Belgium handy, like the regional guessing. You get used to the different languages, you get used to the more hilly parts towards the east or southeast. It is quite a handy country to get. Okay, so the next country I've put in It'll Do Jeff is Denmark. Denmark was quite an interesting one, mostly because of the regional difficulty. It's a very small country, but Denmark has quite a few distinctive clues, like the architecture is quite handy to know. The bollards are very distinctive, although they look similar to the Belgian ones, but they are quite distinctive if you get used to them. Okay, let's move on to the next one, which is Jersey, which is not on this tier list, and I've put this in It'll Do Jeff over fish and chips, is because of the risk of it going wrong. Like, I've had occasions where I've gone Brittany in France over Jersey, and when you don't really have the clues in front of you, it can be quite hard to confirm you're in Jersey or not. Okay, so all these countries I've ranked as 16, and the first country may surprise a few, and it's actually Albania. I find Albania quite an easy country to get. Regional difficulty I've been improving on. It's mostly due to the rifts, it's where the rifts end and where the rifts are not. That makes it very helpful. Limited coverage too. Also, the difference between this and maybe Mont is actually down to the license plates. The license plates have double blue, but are longer than the Italy plates, or you have the red strip. The next one I've put is Bulgaria. The only concern with Bulgaria was the remote rounds and maybe the regional guessing, but I haven't been improving in that. Bulgaria is the main country in the Balkans to have more Cyrillic, so the road signs is very helpful. You get a lot of snow coverage in Bulgaria, or autumn footage or whatever, so it's quite a distinctive one to get. I'm familiar with its like pole tops as well, and I don't know, it kind of feels like everything just feels dead. I have confused with Hungary sometimes, and on the rare instance Czechia, but the architecture is a bit different too, especially in the urban areas, or in the cities is probably the best way of saying it. But there's also some nice regional guesses to go, especially towards the far east, towards the coast, the tourist areas. But yeah, I have to put Bulgaria in It'll Do Jeff. It's okay. The next one is Finland, and the reason I put it in It'll Do Jeff is because it's quite an easy country to get on most instances, with its hints of yellow road lines, its pedestrian crossing signs having 5 zebra stripes instead of 4 like Sweden's and mostly Norway's, and it doesn't have any dashes on its road outlines, which makes it different to the others. But you can get confused with it on kind of remote rounds, so maybe you don't have them clues available. But also it's quite a long country. I get confused. I think it's very north, ends up being south. Sometimes I think it's south and ends up being north. The next country I've put in is Luxembourg, and the main factor here is actually the size of the country, which is very small, but also its hilly environment with the double yellow plates. You've also got the bollards with the grey reflectors that is very distinctive to Luxembourg. You can get them in Switzerland and Germany too, but you tend to not see them that often. On to the next one, and it is another Nordic country, and it is Norway. A lot of distinctive clues. You've got the long dash road outlines, you've got the green commercial vehicle license plates, which is very distinctive to Norway in Europe. You've also got more mountainous environments in Norway, which is very rare for Finland and quite rare for Sweden. So if you've got beautiful coverage and you've got mountains, it's a very good confirmation in Norway. My regional guessing has been a bit better recently, but still needs some work, but it'll do, Jeff. The next country I've put in it'll do, Jeff, is Poland. And Poland's an interesting one because it's quite easy to identify. So like the hull poles, or the thin hull poles, probably better saying it, it's got unique bollards with complete red reflectors, which is completely unique in Poland for Europe. There are quite a few other factors like the language that is very easy to pick up on, for me at least. And also the Doritos sign as well, the yellow triangle road sign with the red thin outline. You don't really get that anywhere else in Central Europe. It's definitely one of the easier countries for me. Okay, for Romania, this is an interesting one. So I put it in it'll do, Jeff. I don't know, like I tend to get the Eastern vibes quite well with the fences. The architecture is quite handy. I tend to get it pretty much all the time. The hull poles seem to be slightly different to the ones in Hungary. Hard to explain, but the more you play, the more you get used to it. There's also, you got more distinctive road signs, like the very thick red outline on the triangle signs. I don't know, I forgot what they're called. There are quite a lot of clues for Romania, and I've been learning quite a few regional differences in Romania too. Romania definitely is one of the nicer countries. Okay, so now we have Sweden, and for Sweden I have put it in it'll do, Jeff, as well, because the dashes are very distinctive, they're very common. Finland, sometimes you can get baited by dashes actually. I'll probably put Sweden as nicer, but it's a bigger country, I think it is, I might be wrong. I feel like the vibes with Sweden are much better at than I am at Finland, especially towards the south near Denmark. That's kind of like a very good, I have a good vibe down there. UK is quite a difficult one regionally. Country identification is quite nice. You know, I've still learnt differences with Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland. Obviously, if you include the Isle of Man, that's also another factor, but it can be quite difficult in England, and I still need to work on that. Like, Southern England's nice, but it's which parts of Southern England I need to be better at. The yellow backs with the white fronts, very handy. The road signs, very distinct. Obviously, I'm very familiar with the UK since I'm from there, so I have to put the UK in, this'll do, Jeff. And Hungary, quite a nice country to get. You got the whole pose, got a unique language, got kind of handy architecture, kind of that autumn, I think it's like an autumn footage, I'm not really sure. Is it winter or autumn? I don't know, Jeff. But it is quite a nice country to get, just regional difficulty. I can be a bit better with the region guessing, but yeah, Hungary will do, Jeff, for sure. The next one I've put is Ireland, and Ireland is a very similar situation to the UK. I just find it a bit harder, where you're not in the mountainous areas. But even when you're in the mountainous areas, it can be very hard to separate the north of Ireland from the south of Ireland. And yeah, I mean, there are quite a lot of distinctive clues that the road dashes, there being yellow, there being no yellow on the back, unlike the UK's. But you do get overlaps, you do get spills, and I can get confused between the two, especially on rural and remote rounds with not many clues. The next one is Italy, and Italy's quite a nice country to get, but the only problem with Italy is the size and length of it. I've been getting better with the regional difficulty, but you've also got the fact of having Sicily, you've also got Sardinia. There's quite a lot of variation in Italy, but the main factor of Italy that makes it very hard at times, I feel, is the very rural and remote locations where you can confuse it with other countries, you know, near the Mediterranean. So it's right on the border, but because of how distinctive its license plates are and signs and street signs and so on, I have to put it into do, Jeff, because it's a very, very easy country to identify in general. And next up is Monte, and it's very similar to Albania, but the issue with Monte is you can get confused with like a Serbia because the plates are very similar to the blue strip. And yeah, I'm not really as familiar with the region guessing in Monte, but it's a very small country anyways. Reduces that a bit, but it's mostly down to it having not as much distinctive clues compared to Albania. But by rule of thumb, I know that Monte's a better punt than going Albania when there's rifts, but it's not really that accurate, it can go wrong. so it'll do, Jeff. And the final country I've put in it'll do, Jeff, is Portugal. And I think most of this is down to its actual size. It's quite a long country, surprisingly, very long country. But I'm still going to put it in it'll do, Jeff, because of its very distinctive clues. You got the ladder pose, similar to one in Brazil. You got the unique language that is quite easy for me to identify with the accents. You've also got the yellow strip on the license plates, although in the future that may not be a factor because of it being removed. But remote and rural rounds, you can get confused with Spain and Portugal quite often, or for me at least. And so I can't really put it as fish and chips, obviously. And regional difficulty, I'm good with the terrain, but towards the south, I'm not as familiar with. So I'll have to put it in it'll do, Jeff. And let's move on to No Thanks, Chief. Rightio, so the first country in No Thanks, Chief is actually Estonia. So we've got the first Baltic country. And the reason why Estonia is in this section is because of it being confused with the other Baltic countries when the clues are limited, so like the remote and rural rounds. And I'm not really that great with the regional familiarity. But Estonia is surprisingly notably smaller than Latvia and Lithuania. And there are quite a few handy clues. But for me, with the Baltics, it's definitely one of the harder areas in Europe to get really good at. The next country I've put down, which may surprise a few, is actually France. A lot of people may have thought, France, that's quite an easy country, you should put it into do, Jeff. But the issue with France, it's got a lot of similar countries that you can get wrong with, and also it's a very big country. So although like I'm getting better with regional familiarity, it's still a big country, it's still hard to get good points in. And that's the main factor, but there are many clues with France. France is quite a generic country, I feel like. It's like if in doubt, go France. The bollards, I forgot to say, are very distinctive in France, although you can get similar ones on rare instances in other countries. But in remote rounds, it can be more difficult. You're also including Corsica, which may not always be easy to get. The next country I've put down is Greece, and I was debating whether this one should be if, buts, and maybes. But Greece is very distinctive based on its language, so language is a very nice clue. Its license plates, or its old license plates, don't always have the blue strip, and they can be as short, almost as short as the Italy ones, which can be very handy for any pro players that may not have noticed. Greece is notorious for its wooden poles, so if you're thinking of the Balkans and you've got wooden poles everywhere, there's a great chance you're in Greece. They've got the faint double white lines in the middle. But the problem with Greece for me is regional guessing. I struggle to get the right island, or I struggle to get whether it's far north or far south. I still need work with it. Okay, so the next one is Latvia. So we have our second Baltic country. And this one's interesting, mostly because it's like Estonia with its clues, but it's a bit bigger. And to be honest, it has more variation. Like, I feel like with regional guessing, Latvia can be easier, but it tends to backfire at times. But the difference between Estonia and Latvia is Estonia has this green tint in the sky in the very remote rounds. So I'll probably put Latvia as a slightly harder as Estonia based on that fact on those very remote rounds. But very similar difficulty, I feel. I think all the Baltics are very similar in terms of difficulty with their own unique clues. And yeah, we can move on to the next one, which is Serbia. And quite a lot of people may be surprised that Serbia's not lower down the list. But to be honest, it's actually quite a nice country to get. The guardrails are different to North Macedonia, I believe. That's one of the clues. You've also got no antenna, but you can sometimes get it, so it can be baited. But the main thing with Serbia compared to all these other countries is the regional difficulty is actually quite easy, for me at least. So like if it's more woodlandy and mountainous, it's more towards like the south end of Serbia. Whereas if it's like quite more flat, urban, almost like autumn-like coverage and super flat in general, it's a good hint that you're probably from Belgrade all the way up towards like the Croatia-Hungary border. So I can't put it in it'll do, Jeff, because I can go around with North Macedonia. And also you've also got some baits and you can't just rely on the cool cart all the time with Serbia. We can now move on to the next country, which is Turkey. I am considering only the European part of Turkey, and this is like towards the harder end of No Thanks, Chief. So this is like not far off its buts and maybes, but to be honest, Turkey has a lot of distinctive clues which make it helpful. If we include the entirety of Turkey, it'll be one of the hardest ones on this tier list. But in this instance, we're just looking at the European part. We've got the dirt on the stop signs, you've got the bollards, and to be honest, the European size of Turkey is actually not as big as people think it is. I know the area cover Istanbul and stuff like that, it's just towards that Greece, Bulgaria kind of border. It can get a bit messy. The next country is Lithuania, and for some reason my scoring's made it slightly more difficult than Estonia and Latvia. Although I feel like bollards are easy to use on the roads, and I don't know, it has a more like similar like examples to like Ukraine and Russia with the pedestrian sides. You got the Kaliningrad border, I guess that's probably had an influence on the similar countries. I can muddle up Lithuania with Kaliningrad, but that's if I can't see any language, to be honest. And finally, this is probably might be the surprise of the video, but I put Czechia right on the border between no thanks chief and if buts and maybes, and this is because of the lack of variation Czechia has, I feel, and also the risk of it being Slovakia. So Czechia has some more mountainous areas towards the borders, but the issue with that is on opposite sides, and sometimes it's hard to work out which actual mountainous-ish range you are in Czechia. So if you know it's Czechia, it's great, but regional difficulty can be quite difficult unless you can work out its Praha or maybe an urban area. It might be more easier. But the Slovakia influence makes its similar country rank quite high. I can model it quite often, but there are several differences to separate Czechia and Slovakia, but we'll cover that once we get to Slovakia. Another thing to add is Czechia is bigger than Slovakia, I believe, and also it is flatter. And most of it is flat, and those flat regions can be hard to like kind of narrow down where you are in. So Czechia has to be right on the border there. And yeah, let's move on to if, buts, and maybes. The first country I've put down is Croatia. And Croatia is definitely one of the harder countries in Europe to get right, but it's got quite a lot of handy clues with its white license plate. But in the future, there's going to be more blue strips if there's going to be new coverage being added, so be aware of that factor. I don't know, the environment can be quite gettable. You've also got the pedestrian signs that are quite different to its neighbouring countries. With the belt, you've also got a few other factors that have an impact that can help you confirm Croatia, but it's not a straightforward country. I think it's Slovenia and Croatia had the worst countries for like Balkan roulette. But I've been doing some research, we get better with the regional guesses, but for me, I can improve on it more. And compared to the countries on the list that I've put ahead of it, they are definitely easier than Croatia, I feel. So I think that's a fair assumption, but Croatia is if, buts, and maybes for sure. The next country may surprise people, but it's actually Russia. But this is a big but. I'm only talking about the European part of Russia. So that includes like the Moscow area and the little bit of area around east of Ukraine-ish. So all that part of Russia, I feel like you can get better with regional difficulty, but I think the size of the regional difficulty I put is 5, which is the highest. But the reason why it's not like in raw quiche and a rice cake is because to identify Russia, it's quite easy. Cyrillic on blue signs everywhere, long antenna, no red car. Like, there's so many factors to confirm Russia. The black tips on the bottom of the signpost is a given. If you split between Ukraine, there are so many factors to confirm Russia, and it's quite an easy country to get right. The only issue is the regional guessing and the country size. The next country is probably the hardest country based on its size in Europe for me, and that is Slovenia. And with Slovenia, I feel like it's one of those countries where you have a lot of clues most of the time, but it's like you will still get clues. So like, for example, the bollards, you get similar ones in Austria, but it rules out Croatia. But yeah, Slovenia is one of those countries where it's quite small, but with the remote rounds it can get quite difficult. And although it's a small country which has an impact, its regional difficulty can be quite difficult if it's not towards the east. I've just gone this based on getting the country wrong quite a lot of times, and for me it's probably one of the hardest countries to get right in urban areas, especially if you don't have the area code. I tend to get it muddled up with Slovakia quite often, surprisingly. It's one of those countries where you can easily go wrong with, and it has to be an if, buts, and maybes down to that fact. And also, Slovenia and Croatia, like I mentioned before, is like the main culprit for ruining Balkan streaks. Okie dokie, so let's move on to the next one, which is pain with the S. And yes, it's Spain. Spain's got a lot of distinctive clues like the yellow reflectors, the yellow reflected bollards, the kind of very dry and arid feel is quite useful for Spain. The pedestrian crossing signs are distinctive to Spain or Andorra, but you won't really muddle up Andorra and Spain unless you're right on the border. Spain's got a lot of very handy clues like Russia, but the main issue with Spain is on the remote rounds where it can get difficult. That's probably what could make it harder than Russia, but I'm going to put it in front of Russia just for this sake. So like the regional difficulty I'm not great at, but some areas I'm getting better at, like the far north Spain I'm getting better at, and probably areas around Madrid and maybe Barca that I'm getting better at. You've also got the fact of the Canaries, whether you can identify the Canaries, which to be honest I can most of the time, and I may not get the island all the time, but I can kind of like limit it down quite well. So Spain is probably better just on that factor alone. And yeah, but it's still one of the hardest countries I feel. It's hard to get a good score in the country. So I have to put it in if, buts, and maybes. And the final country I put in if, buts, and maybes is Ukraine. And Ukraine is an interesting one because if you got the red car, it's very distinguishable. But other than that, you need to get familiar with language. You have to be used to that. You know, I think the roads are generally less quality in Ukraine. On Google Street View, you don't have Generation 4 in Ukraine. There's quite a few differences to separate from Russia, but to be honest, it's a very big country. And although it's quite distinctive to work out the west side of Ukraine, I think other areas, apart from the black car in some of the cities towards the east, it gets very difficult to get a good score in Ukraine. And based on that factor alone, with the regional difficulty, the country size, and also the meta availability is quite limited, Ukraine will have to be on the board of if, buts, and maybes. I probably find it harder to get a good score in Ukraine than I do in Russia, actually. Well, or European Russia, at least. So I might actually put it harder than Russia in this instance. And that is all the if, buts, and maybes. And let's move on to the hardest countries in Europe for me. And yeah, let's jump straight into that mess. Right here, so the first one in Rockish and a rice cake is North Macedonia, and this will be a big shock to a lot of people, but the main factor of North Macedonia is I muddle it up with Serbia a lot. I'm still not familiar with all the coverage in North Macedonia, so once I've studied the coverage, it'll probably be a no thanks chief actually. So it's just because I haven't studied that much compared to other countries. And the other factors, I feel like, I don't know, it's based on the scores. I feel like I'm a little too often with other countries casually. Like, I think the countries above, I find it easier to identify them on most instances than North Macedonia. It's notably harder compared to all the 5 on the if, buts, and maybes section, which is quite interesting. But I feel like once I've done this Balkan guide, or once I've released the video, which might take a few weeks, unfortunately, because it's a lot of information, I want to make it the best as I can. It will be definitely a lot higher, I feel. So at the moment, it's the second hardest country in Europe for me, but it probably won't be for long. So that may change the next time I do this tier list. But yeah, it's definitely my second hardest country just based on the fact I forget about it, and also I just haven't studied it enough. And the hardest country I feel in Europe to get right and to get a good score in is Slovakia for me. So the main way I thought of this is it's Czechia but harder pretty much. And what makes it different to if, buts, and maybes is, to be honest, getting the country wrong. Like, I feel like Spain, Russia, Ukraine, quite easy countries to get wrong. But you've also got the facts like regional difficulty is not as, it's quite harder than you think it is. If it's very flat, then yes, it's quite easy. But towards the east, or where the hills are, it's towards the east, but you don't know which kind of mountain chain it is. It's quite difficult. But the remote rounds can get extremely difficult. Unless you've got like a long antenna, which is more common in Slovakia compared to like Czechia, you can easily go wrong with Slovakia very often. Urban rounds can be very difficult if you don't have house numbers, and utility poles are very similar to Czechia, so the urban score is quite higher to confirm the country compared to the ones above, I remember putting. So it would just rank quite high with score throughout. And yeah, it is the country I struggle with getting a good score the most on, and also getting right in general. But hopefully that will change in the future. And yeah, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this new video. If you want to see me do a tier list for Asia next, smash that like button. And yeah, feel free to give this a go in your own time. And yeah, I'll see you in the next one. Yeah, of course.